Hello, hello. All right. Like we are live, so we're going to be looking at leveling up some Streamer.bot extensions using C#. And I'm not sure how I got to this point, but I did refactor this point system core and put that on my GitHub. However, we're going to start over because I'm not sure why I ended up with a GPL license, and I would love to make it just do whatever you want to do. So we'll see if we can make that happen, and we'll walk through and see how we got to refactor this to allow Twitch and YouTube commands without having to have them separated out like the original one. So first thing I'm going to do is just download this multi-platform system thingy. Then here I'm going to import it. And so pretty much I just copied the text out of the file, pasted it in here, and it gives me all this information. So effectively it's saying it's going to import all this stuff if I would like it to. So 13 actions and 8 commands. Go ahead, import. They're going to be disabled, and then I have to enable them. All right, so now if we go to actions, we have all these new actions, and commands are all disabled. This is a fresh install of Streamer.bot, so nothing is set up yet. All I did was import that file. What we're really going to be focusing on is the code. So in this implementation, we have a set points and add points for Twitch, Trovo, and YouTube all separate. And we're going to make it so you can just have one that will take care of all of it. And then on commands, there was a add for Trovo, add for Twitch, add for YouTube. So same thing, we're just going to have one for each of those. We're also going to change how the redeems work and put them into code. Let's buckle up. So when you pick this, it'll reveal, hey, we're executing this code. If you double click this thing, it's going to open up the actual code that's running. So you could edit in here, but you don't get like IntelliSense and such. So I'm going to just copy this over to Visual Studio. Visual Studio Community Edition is free. I'm like, you can just download it and use it. I just new file. Well, let's make a new project. A class library. We'll put it in TVG points system. TVG point system. Now to make it a little happier, we'll go ahead and add Newtonsoft, even though we'll eventually get rid of it again. I'll make that happy. This is like a version check, which I don't really care for, to be honest. Not really any reason to have this. If you would want to have versioning, I guess this could be a reminder if there's an update, but we're just going to get rid of it. All right, now we have the CPH guy. How can I get that to work? Well, it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. So first thing, I guess the question is, why do we have to have one of these per each of set points Twitch, add points Twitch, set points YouTube, add points YouTube? It does behave a little bit differently, but there's no reason we can't have one that figures out which and then executes it. So what we're going to do is actually add a few things. And to see what's happening, let's go ahead back into this is the one that I have set up, so I'm just going to look at that. When we trigger action, it's got to figure out kind of where it came from. So when we trigger it from Twitch, right, we have a chatting action that came in from Twitch. And if we look at it, it says, hey, here's a Twitch chat message. This is the message that I typed in. Here's the raw. Here's some parse thing, right? Take all the spaces and make parameter out of each of them. Give them each their own input. Who's the user that initiated the message? What's their user ID on Twitch, right? And we have things like event source, Twitch, right? However, not everything comes through like this. So sometimes event source is going to be a command. Sometimes event source is the platform, right? So we have to like look at a bunch of these different messages and decide how are we going to determine what the eventual trigger was. Was it something on Twitch? Was it something on YouTube? Something on Trovo? And then have that determine how to handle the message and go forward. So in this case, the syntax for add and set is the same on all the platforms. It's add points, space, the number of points, space, the username. So if we see add points, we know the next argument is definitely the point number. So we can do that consistently on all the platforms. And then when we figure out which platform it is, it's just a matter of how do we handle the username. So if I come back in here, I open this one, I have this helper that says, hey, get the triggering platform action. What action that is causing this thing to run, which platform triggered it? And then set platform triggering action. This will actually put it into an argument so that you can use it in a sub action to set a variable and then use that variable somewhere else. So this is kind of a little more helpful. So we're going to just grab this whole thing, the triggering platform helper code. We're going to put that in here. Take a look at that. Then I like to have constants instead of magic strings generally. So we have just a little helper thing with some constants for YouTube, Trovo, inputs, and then common variables that are on the different messages already that we can look for. We'll just add that here. This way I know I don't have a typo. If it'll IntelliSense me the actual thing, and then it'll replace it correctly. All right. These are the platforms that we're actually looking for. If you want Port Trovo as well, I only have Twitch and YouTube, so I commented that one out. And then the variable name that we're going to use to track the points, and we'll look at this other thing later. Now, because this one is a custom to our plugin, I didn't put it with the other constants. This is more of within our plugin, something that we're tracking. These are all standard for Streamer.bot and things that we can look for on other messages. Now, I like this type of formatting, to be honest. I'm going to do it one more time and tell it to keep my formatting. All right, so now that we have the platforms that we're supporting, the variable we're going to track the points under, and a bunch of constants, how are we actually figuring out the triggering platform? So first thing we're going to do is say, hey, look at the user type. If there's a variable for user type on the message. So let's go back in here. User type, Twitch. So in this case, I pull the user type. I check and see if it's in one of the platforms that we're supporting. If it is, just put out a message that says we're using Twitch for the term platform, or we're using the user type constant to determine which is the platform it came from. There's a little log. So how did we determine that it was Twitch? If the user type is not there, let's see. Timed action. Present viewers that I'm currently not logging. How do we exclude from action queue? I'm going to turn that off, so now it'll actually log that one. Timed action. So this, I don't have a user type, right? So this timed action that's running to see, hey, present viewers does not have a user type. So I can't use that to determine which platform to execute the command on. However, we have event source. So when we look at event source, it's Twitch. All right, so we say, okay, user type didn't work, event source. If the event source is a command, we're going to do something. In this case, it's not a command. In this case, we're actually going to check the platforms that we're supporting. If it's in there, we're going to say we are using the event source to determine Twitch, right? Event source is Twitch. So now when I see this, I know which platform to add points to. All right. Now the other option is command. Let's go ahead and execute command. Add 100 captain. I'm just typing into my Twitch right now. Perfect. So now we have, well, we do have a user type on this one, but that's because I executed the command. If this was executed in some other way, it might not have a user type. So in this case, it would fall through the user type. Imagine we don't have that. Event source, this time, is command. Now we're in the first switch. If event source is command, now we're going to get the command source. And what can we do with that? Command source, switch. So effectively, we can keep updating this as needed if we have other commands that we're trying to use or other triggers that are not giving us the information of which source to provide it to. And or we could add our own variables as we go and look for those. So realistically, this method works for me because the type of messages that I'm looking for and the type of commands that I'm actually signaling against. But this is what is going to allow me to say, hey, I have a single entry point for adding points, and then it can determine which one to call from there. This set platform triggering action just calls it, makes sure that there is one, if we were able to determine it, we set a variable with that value. This way, further downstream actions could load that variable and do something with it. If we don't find it, we're returning false. If we do find it, we're returning true. So effectively, if we couldn't figure it out, we're just going to break because further downstream might depend on that. And we're telling them, hey, that failed. The other thing you notice, this one's public. This one's private. Streamer.bot is only going to look for public bool methods that have no arguments anyway. So to help, just kind of clarify which of these are triggerable, we make them public. The ones that are private, these are all just helpers that other code is going to use, but they cannot be called by Streamer.bot directly through the execute code method. All right, so that is how we determine the triggering platform. Now, we have to set points for Twitch, so we're still going to keep these. We're going to still say, hey, if you want to just set points for Twitch, by all means, you're good to go. But we're going to have another one that does not do that. And I'm going to turn this back off. If I come back in here. Come back to that. So more generally speaking, we want to figure out what is the actual API surface that we're going to want to use for getting and setting points. So yes, we have set points for Twitch and set points for YouTube, but we also want a more generic one. We're going to have just get and set user points. So when we're getting user points, again, helper, this is private. This cannot be called by Streamer.bot. Internally, how are we doing this? Internally to our own code, how are we doing this? User points are going to be stored on the platform and the user ID. We can get by platform and user ID, and then we can set by platform, user ID, and point amount. And obviously addition is just getting, adding, and then resetting it. So these two methods internally are how we're going to manage our points. Now, from there, once we say get user points, all right, get Twitch, this user, what is their point value? Well, now we're going to actually call in and say, okay, well, go and call the Twitch, get user points, and then call the YouTube, get user points, etc. Same for set. All we're doing is saying set this user ID on Twitch, set this user ID on YouTube to these point value. And we'll fill those in as we go. More broadly, because now we have this way to determine it, and this one is callable by Streamer.bot, we're going to say set points, and it will figure out, based on the arguments, how to actually do it. We'll say take the first input, so add points by itself, exclamation point, add points is the command. The next thing that comes is the input 0, which is going to be the point value. So all set points is doing is saying get the first argument and make sure it's actually a number and that it's set, so that we have an input 0 that is a number, and this will parse it. Now in this case, I'm saying we're not allowing negative points. So if you try and say set the user's points to minus 5,000, it won't do it. Now you could take this out if you want to have something like penalty points where they have to earn it back. Welcome to stream. We're just looking at some Streamer.bot and C# programming. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. At this point, we're saying, okay, well, now determine the triggering platform from all those other properties that we had above. If we can't figure it out, we're going to abort. And then otherwise, we're going to call the corresponding set points. Add points is the same way. We're going to verify the first argument is a number, determine who is calling add points, and then call that method on the appropriate platform. Now, when we look at how do we do this for Twitch, I'm going to grab this whole thing and we'll talk about it. I'm going to leave the original so we can compare some things. When we look at Twitch, we can set user points by ID, right? So that's here. We want to set their points. We know their user ID and the point value that we're setting. This one is saying determine the point value that we want to set along with who the user is, right? From the command. This one is I already know all that information. I'm calling it. Add points, same thing. Figure it out from the command and then call the appropriate. Now, when we set Twitch user ID, set Twitch user points by ID, there is a method right on the CPH that is set Twitch user variable by ID, and we're going to use our points variable name. So set this user, the points variable, to this value, and this is persisted. We want this to stick around, even if we close the stream or Streamer.bot. So now, same in reverse, get Twitch user variable by ID. This is a long, it might not be set yet, so it's nullable. Get the user ID points variable, and it's a persisted variable. Set points on Twitch. This one specifically, we already know it's coming from Twitch, so you can bind it directly to this one. So if you have a command that's Twitch, like Twitch chat, you don't have to call the other one that's going to have to determine where it came from. You're going to call this one because we already know where it came from. In this case, set Twitch points. We still know the variable is the first input or input 0. Make sure it's a number. Set Twitch points to this amount. Well, to what user? So in this case, we're going to say, okay, take the first input and assume it's the user's name. I believe Twitch doesn't allow spaces or anything. So when we have input 1, it for sure is going to be the user that we're targeting. Set Twitch points, this amount to this target user that we just figured out. If there is not an input 1, this is invalid command. And we're going to just return false. In this case, set Twitch points, the amount to set for this username. Well, how do we do this? We have to get the user's ID, because in Streamer.bot, we're going to be storing it against a user ID, not the username. When we type in the user's name, in the background, it's got to figure out the ID. So in this case, we already have a method called Twitch get user info by login, and that's the username that we just found. We call that, and it's going to give us back an object that has the user's ID. If we can't find something like that, we'll just log an error and break. So now we're calling the eventual starting method that we had where it's set Twitch user points by ID, this user ID to this amount. And then this is just a bunch of logging, so you could see what happened, and then further down the line actions could use these values to maybe generate a message themselves or do something else. Add points is pretty much the same, except we're going to pull out the user's points, add them, and then set them back. So same thing here. We're going to make sure the points is actually a number. We're going to pull the target username, look up the user's ID. But in this time, when we add, we're going to get their points first. If they've never been assigned any points, which is the coalesce, right? So they never had points assigned, so it's null. We're going to assume it's 0 and add. So we're just going to more or less set it to whatever we're adding. And then when we set Twitch user points by ID, it's their user ID and new points. Again, logging and variables for downstream actions. So this is everything for Twitch. When we look up a user by username, we get their ID and we're saving it. It's the same across the board. When we look at YouTube, it's going to be the same thing. The only thing different about YouTube is how the usernames are set up. So I'm going to just pull all this out. Just like we had set Twitch user points by ID, get Twitch user points by ID, same. YouTube. Set the points. The argument 0 is always the amount that we're setting. The only difference now is how do we figure out who we're setting them to. In the case of Twitch, we had a username that goes to a user ID. In the case of YouTube, it's a little more complicated. So we have to figure out who the target is on YouTube. And there could be multiple users with same username, or like YouTube has spaces in the name. So it's a little more difficult to actually assemble it, but the code had an initial method for figuring that out, and we'll look at that in a minute. In this case, this method will set an argument that's all the users that we're matching. So if you did have more than one user that matched, it's going to add to all of them, or set all of them. We'll say find all the users. And then for each user found, set that user's ID, add some arguments and logging. The problem with this is it's only going to have the last one. So if you did have multiple, it's only going to be the last one. This is kind of a corner case, so it's not, in my opinion, that important, but you could do some further work here to isolate or handle that strangeness. Add points to YouTube, same. The first input is the point amount. Make sure it's a number. Same thing, get all the users. And instead of just setting the points, we have to get the points first and then set. And this one does some tracking around it. Couldn't actually match a user because the usernames are weird there. So really the only difference for YouTube is a little bit on how we match usernames, but everything else is the same. The command, points that we're setting, and then the user target. Trovo, exactly the same. I'll just pull that over. We're setting by user ID and points, getting by user ID, exactly the same. First argument is the point value. Second argument is the username. When we look at for Trovo, there is a set Trovo points. Oh, did I not set my regions correctly? Oh, yep. Set Trovo user var. So right on the CPH, we have set Trovo user var and get Trovo user var. So just eventually, all we have to do is figure out which method on this CPH to call, right? Get and set YouTube variable. It's all the same thing. When we reset all the user points, we're just clearing that variable name across all platforms effectively. We don't care where it's coming from. We just say everybody's points back to 0, all platforms, just clear it all out for this variable name. This is that get YouTube target method. I did refactor it a bit, so we'll put it side by side. Get YouTube target. This one, we're going to get input 0 and make sure it's an integer. We already did that in all of our flows, so I got rid of that. This is taking the raw input. So on a message, we have raw input that is exactly what the user typed. Actually, here. chatting. Raw input. This is exactly what I typed. Unparsed. It's not put into the argument buckets. So this is what this is going to let me do is figure out, in the case of YouTube, which can have spaces, we don't want it, you know, argument 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 if someone's got a bunch of spaces in their name. Well, instead, what we're going to do, we know the first two, input 0 and input 1, if we chop those off, everything after that is the username, regardless if it has spaces or not. So that's effectively what this is doing. It's removing the first, it's saying input 0 and input 1, take those off the front, and then everything after that is the username, and then some special handling if there's an @ sign, if we're calling out a user for some reason. That's the, and then that username could match multiple users. So this is building a list of possible matches based on the username that was provided, which could have spaces and could have been parsed further. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds on exactly what this is doing, but at a high level, that's what it's doing. I refactored it to just simplify it a little bit and not double check things that didn't need to be double checked. Okay, now if we come back to code, the other thing that was helpful is sending a message to whatever platform initiated the request. So if someone asks for their points, we don't want to have to say, okay, well, if the trigger, like, have 3 different triggers, it's like, you know, if it came from Twitch, send it out back to Twitch. We want it to say, based on the message itself, figure out where it came from and send it back to that platform. So just like we figured out the triggering platform before, if someone's asking, give me my points, it should already know where that came from and be able to send it back correctly. So I'm going to grab this area, this region. And here we're saying, get bot preference, first of all. So do we want this message to be sent back to the user from our bot or from our primary account? You can change this to false if you want it to come from your streaming account. This is the variable name that we're going to look for bot preferences. You can change that to whatever you want. But if you have a variable that called bot and it's false, we're not going to send it from the bot account. If you have a variable called true, it will. And then when we're sending a message, the variable name that we're going to look for. So before we call the send message, we have to set this variable called message. And getting this bot preference, while it is a bool with no arguments, this is not doing anything that would actually be helpful for something down the line. It's not resetting anything or setting a variable or doing anything. It's literally reading it into memory. So this is a helper. So this get bot preference is saying, see if there is a variable set up. If there is, use it. If not, default to using the bot. When we send a platform message, we're going to make sure there is a variable called message, right? So you can change this name, but there has to be something set if we're going to send it. So if there's nothing set, we're just going to break. Then we're going to call our get platform triggering action, just like before. So let me go ahead and trigger points. I come back in here. Right. So this is a example. All right. So we have user type Twitch, user ID. Right. So we know who is triggering it and from what platform. So we're going to send a message to that platform specifically about that user's points. All right. Now this is more general. This is just sending a platform message, and then we have a send points message that we'll look at that uses this. So sending a platform message, what platform are we sending it to? What's our bot preference? And then send it. So Twitch has send message. YouTube is send YouTube to latest monitored, and Trovo send Trovo. Each of them takes a bot and a message. Sending the user points itself. Send user points message. Send user points message tries to get the user ID from here. So whoever is triggering, right, when we look at our action history, oops, sorry one. We look at our action history, what user ID requested their points, right? If we don't know the user ID, we can't go forward. Then determine the platform based on all the message properties. If we can't figure it out, we can't go forward. If we have those two things, we know we can look up the user's points, and now we just have to send the message to that same platform that asked for it. Look up the user's points. Try and get the user's name. So if just that is not required, but in the reply message, we might want to address the user and say, user, you have this many points, right? If you don't need that, you don't need to pull the username out, but and you could even default to something else. So instead of returning false here, we could say username equals unknown, or asker, or point requester, or whatever, right? We can put a default in here, and instead of returning false, we don't return, right? So we just default the name instead. However you want to do it. But effectively, we pull the user's name so that we can address them in the response and tell them how many points they have. Now, in this case, I'm saying use commands to see how you can actually spend your points. Right, so now, effectively, where we're at this point is we have one entry point instead of three. So in this case, when we look back here at the commands, we don't need an add for Trovo. We don't need an add for Twitch and add for YouTube. We only need one. And it'll figure it out based on message properties. Same for the set. So we just got rid of 4 of these 8. And the same for these actions. We don't need one of each. We just, so we got rid of 4 of these actions. Right? Now, if we go a step further, and how do we do the redeems? Now, the reason I prefer to do the redeems in code is because I can set up messages that know all the names correctly versus I have to manage all the names in Streamer.bot separately for each message, right? Like if I said, hey, tell me what are the commands I can run. Well, now I have to maintain commands in a bunch of spots and a message list that knows the right things. But if I do it all in code, I can generate the message based on what's active in the code. We'll look at that. All right, themes. This much. When we look at redeems, this was what users can spend their points on. So we're going to have a bunch of commands that are going to let them actually spend their points. I have a common flow for redeeming sound effects. So I have a bunch of different sound effect buckets that I might want to have different points for, and maybe different setups of, like in my Streamer bot, let me show you how I have it set up. So you can redeem these smash sound effects. These are like short clips like defeated or let's go, right? Just really short clips in the smash announcer. These are cheap. Then I have, some of the guys that we stream with. We have custom actions and that we can trigger for them. So I say, okay, here's like a 30-second song about something, whatever. These are a bit more expensive. And then we have different song bites or different clips from series that we've done in the past. So we have all these different buckets of redeems. But in general, they're all going to go to a sound effects queue that is blocking. So we don't want these overlapping. When we look at the action queue, default, this one for me is primarily like the sounds in my ear and stuff like that. All right, Raptor Games. Kind of wish I knew about this bot. I spent about 2 months developing and expanding my own YouTube stream bot just to see this stream and learn about this bot. Oh, well, better late than never. What bot are you using and building on? This one is good, but it definitely has some bugs. But in here we have the default thing. This triggers sound in my ear when someone chats. So, for instance, when you popped in, I could hear a sound, and I saw it here. The sound effects, though, go into a queue so that they don't overlap. We want to make sure the sounds are one after another at best. And then we can pause that if it's getting out of control. So when I'm looking at redeems, again, this is the name of the action or the redeem name, right? So back here, the name of the action, smash sound effects, defeated. What's the cost to redeem it? What is the full set of actions in that bucket? Because this might be a help command, or this might be an invalid. Like the user might have typed something that's not valid, and now we want to tell them, well, this is valid. Oh, wow. Went all the way from scratch. I had considered rewriting this from scratch because it's not open source and I have no idea what it's doing, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to go that far yet. And then the default action if none's provided. So in this case, a lot of times I'll have, if you don't specify one, it'll just pick one at random. Now, I want to upgrade this to actually look if the specific redeem is enabled, so you can turn it on and off and it will respect those. But right now, if you pick random and you have a disabled action, it could still trigger it technically. So in this case, we're going to look up the user ID, say who is redeeming this, right? Which user is trying to redeem this thing? From what platform did they trigger it? Because those are the two things we need to know for points, right? We need to know who by their ID and the platform. Once we have those two things, we can see, are they actually able to redeem this thing? Now, we say, what is your point total currently? And then we try and find your name just like before. And before we weren't defaulting, but here we are. So we're saying, if we can't figure out your username, we're going to just call you the redeemer. In this case, the first argument we're going to assume is the effect they're trying to trigger, right? And if they didn't supply one, or it's blank, so they just put a space, there would be the default, which is random in this case. You don't have to do this, and I want to replace this with actually looking at the valid and enabled actions and picking one that way. But then we look at the dictionary and we say, okay, based on the actions, how they're set up, is this a valid action? And if not, we're going to show a message like, this redeem costs this amount. If you don't specify something, it'll pick a random. Otherwise, you can specify one of these. And this is really the reason I really love this versus in Streamer.bot is the key list is automatically updating on your messaging. And I need to update this to split the message if it gets too long, but this is just huge. And if it actually had only the enabled ones, it's just so brilliant. You can go in, disable it, and in real time, the next time it's called up, it will have the correct list. If the user did pick a valid thing to trigger, now we're going to see, can they trigger it? What's your user point total? And is it less than what it costs to redeem this? If so, just show them a little sad message that they don't have enough points. Break, so we don't actually trigger it. If they do have enough points, we're going to reduce their points. Set an action like a variable of what just got triggered, and then run it. Now, this is important. The false is telling it to run in the queue that the action would have run in anyway. Right? So I have all of these actions set up to run in the sound effect queue. If I didn't put false here, it would run immediately and they would overlap. So we definitely don't want that. This is say run it in the queue that it came from, or that it would have run in anyway. Right? So that's like the common helper. This is the general flow, right? What are you trying to redeem? How much does it cost? What are all the actions that could have been called for that bucket that you tried to trigger? And if you didn't specify something, what do you want by default? Oh, I see a few people in here. We got some Streamer.bot lovers, or what's going on? I appreciate any comments, and if you'd like me to look at anything specific, just let me know. When we look at Smash, like I said, that's kind of a cheap one. It's 50 points. You can change it to whatever you want. Of course, just change this variable. You could also make this like look up the variable like we did with the bot preference. A lot more could be expanded on here, but kind of an idea to get started. And then the actual lookups, right? So these are the keys that I want the user to be able to type, because having them type this huge name, not so great. But if they can just type this little bit, and it triggers this. And this mapping. Hey, what's going on, Hammer? We're doing some building with code instead of hammers today. In this case, this is how all that stuff stays in sync. So if I didn't want this one anymore, I can either get rid of it, comment it. If I add a new one, whatever, and now my messaging stays intact. You can also specify one of these. Bam, this is always up to date and correct. I just have to put it here. And then when I redeem a smash, this is the command that I want to use, how much it costs in the lookup. And so a lot of this is now just cookie cutter, because now that I have my common set up, it's just how much does it cost? What's the mapping? What's the command? And call the common, right? This command costs this much to trigger. Here's all the things you can trigger. By default, if they don't specify something, each of my buckets has a random. If you don't like that, you don't have to do it, but each of mine has something like this. And I want to update that to be more dynamic still. So realistically, it's just the same thing over and over again. The reason why I have common for sound effects, again, is so that everything goes into the queue and they don't have overlapping sounds. If you had different things like OBS scene transitions, maybe you want to have a different queue for like OBS manipulation, so that you're not having competing transitions firing or whatever. So when we have these action cues, you could have another one that's like OBS transitions, and it's blocking so that each one has to go one after another. All right, so that is kind of the totality of that. If we look at, I put this back onto GitHub. I'm not sure, somewhere along the line, I think I found this code, and it was a GPL3 license, so that's what I used. I can't find it again, and if I can't find it, I would just change this to MIT license. Like, I really don't care. Like, do whatever you want with this. This is the fully refactored version. You can drop this straight into your execute code, right? Instead of, so this execute code, the one that we get by default, right? You could override that one. And then instead of add points, Trovo, all this crap, it would just be C# execute method. In my case, it's called currency TVG. And then you'd pick add point. You could still have an add points Trovo or an add points Twitch if you have triggers that are only. Yeah, so this one has like an integration with Streamer.bot, I guess, which can do some of that stuff. But itself, it doesn't manage it. It's just an integration to Streamer.bot. So when you drop that in, so when I look at it, I just have add points, execute add points, chatting, update this user's points by 5 every time they chat. This one was easy enough to do here because when we have a sub action here, you can say set global variable to the user redeemer. So it already knows the platform and user ID. I would like to see how the code for this is implemented because that's really what I was trying to do, see if there's a method like this. That's pretty much what we've re-implemented. So it's saying find the user, update this variable name, this only thing, and it's also in code, so there's some duplication here, and increment it by 5. So this was easy enough that it's here and not in the code. Same for first words. Your first time typing, it's just going to give you 300 points. Get user points is send user points message, which internally figures out where it came from. So we don't have to have one for each platform. Same for the set points, right? Set points is going to figure out where it came from and do it correctly. Add watch points, how many points per tick. So on your where is it? Platforms, settings. If you have this present viewers thing set to every 5 minutes, or if you change it, every 2 minutes, whatever it is, whatever you change it to, that's what's going to trigger this one. So every 5 minutes, anyone who's still in the chat gets 10 points. So that's how you would tweak all the things. Now, all of these obviously are still triggerable directly, so we have different commands that can trigger, one of those buckets of things and use their points correctly. So that is how we refactored the points system and the redeems and how all that's set up. Like I said, I really like it because the messages stay in sync. And when I add a new redeem, I go into the code. I figure out which bucket it's in. If it's a new bucket, it's literally, copy, paste this, change a couple names, change the points. However, the mappings are set up, what command I want to use. Like, it's just this much, copy and paste, a little bit of changing to match how the commands are set up. And it will handle all that. So not too scary. I see a lot of people, oh, scary code, don't touch it. It's not really that scary. And I'm sure, copying and pasting little chunks here and there is very doable for most people. So, any thoughts on that? Questions, ideas, anything else to look at? I would also have a WebSocket server that I'm going to look at next. I do want to end this stream and make a new stream for that. So unless you have any questions or thoughts, I will say Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for popping in, those who were popping in and out. I'm probably not going to edit this. So it shall be a live stream tutorial if anyone cares of how we got to this point and how we fixed the point system to not have to require Trovo, YouTube, and Twitch to be managed separately. I'm going to make a new stream for the socket server integration and maybe fire that up in about 45 minutes. Thank you all, everyone, and have a great day.